You're skeptical of the state. You're getting over the myth of authority. But the state is still formidable. Or is it? You've got a front row seat in the transition to a free society. Let's dive headfirst into The White Pill Box with your host, Mark Maresca.
Greetings all. Thank you so much for joining today. Today I am happy to welcome as my guest Jacob Day. Jake, welcome to The White Pill Box.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this one since the power was out last time we had to reschedule.
I remember. Folks, Jake co-hosts the very cool podcast If by Whiskey, found at ifbywhiskey.com. Also on X at If by Whiskey Show. Jake and his co-host Mark Poles were kind enough to have me as a guest on their show recently. Then Mark appeared on this show, The White Pill Box, soon after, and it was a great time all around. So it's Jake's turn now to sit in the hot seat. So now, besides being a podcast host, Jake's a talented singer, musician who does solo work and was also frontman for the band Six Gun for many years. You do want to hear their cover of Jailhouse Rock. By the way, Jake, how did that come about? I'm curious.
The cover or the band?
The cover itself of that particular song.
Well, so growing up in my house, when I was with my dad, it was either Led Zeppelin or Elvis Presley. That's what was playing. And I've heard every Elvis song, every outtake, every alternate take, every crappy song from the movies, every Elvis song that's been recorded. And when I was a kid, I used to walk around singing them a lot. And that was one of the ones that when I started my band, we were really trying to kind of keep a, not strict rockabilly, but a very roots-based, rock and roll-based sound. And to me, that's the iconic. Everybody knows that song. There's tons of verses to it. So there's a lot of different stuff in there. And we decided to do it. That was the cover we did on the first record back in like 2005.
Wow. That's you singing, I assume, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it was great. I just loved it. It was just a different twist on it. And as usual, it got the toe tapping. So I'm glad I stumbled on that in your website.
Funny story about that. When you do a cover song, you're technically supposed to buy a license for it or get permission to do it. It's not old enough yet to be in the public domain, but being in kind of a punk band and being a little, being a hooligan, I guess. We didn't get permission. We just recorded it. And I figured if we ever got big enough to where it became a legal problem, then that was a bigger benefit than the legal problem. So we just
because you were big enough. That's interesting. There you go. There's that patent to copyright right there, as usual.
Yeah.
In your music, I've listened to some of the songs that you had posted there, and one in particular I wanted to ask you about. It's called "What I Leave Behind," and I thought that song was just beautiful. It was sung beautifully. It was composed beautifully. I assume you're the composer as well as having performed it.
Yeah, I did. I played drums and guitars and everything on there.
What inspired that particular song?
That particular song, so every year, I should say almost every year, I think I didn't do it for 1 year, but almost every year on my anniversary with my wife, I record a song for her. I go in the studio and I do a cover song. I've done a couple originals, and they're always, love songs and things that are special between her and I, but this particular one was the one I did last year. And it really, we were planning on having a baby, and we have a baby now. She's almost a year old. So this is right before we got pregnant. But I really was just reflecting on if I wasn't here tomorrow, if something happened where I'm not here, what is it that I'm leaving behind? Who am I? What's my legacy going to be? And what are people going to talk about and say about me when I'm not here? And so what I leave behind came kind of the theme went through my head, and I sat down and wrote it out pretty quickly, actually. And I've access to an amazing studio up near Seattle. So I was able to get in and do that and put it down and surprise her with it. She loved it.
It is a beautiful, beautiful song, and I will link to it so the folks can, get a taste of your work. And you have a great voice. It reminds me. I was trying to struggle thinking of who it reminded me of. I think it's the singer of REM a little bit. I don't know if anyone's told you sound a little like him, but it's to me it's a melodic beautiful, just enough grittiness. I just love it.
I get Mike Ness a lot from Social Distortion, and a lot of our live stuff, especially in the Six Gun days, was in that vein of that early punk rock before it was like the skate punk. And I haven't heard Michael Stipe, but I'll take it. I appreciate it. He's a good singer.
Okay, let's get to some of our libertarian related stuff. I always like to ask what it is that that sort of red pilled my guests. So what got you over? And I believe you mentioned COVID as one of the sort of time frames for you. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep this followable and not do the weave too much. But we talked about this a little bit when you came on our show. Is I was raised in a very Republican house, very Christian upbringing, but in Southern California. And as it is natural to go against your parents and rebel, and I never really followed politics closely, but being in Southern California, being in loosely in the music business, being a musician, a lot of the people that I looked up to were Democrats or liberals, I guess. And I tended to kind of ascribe to that somewhat. Again, I was never real strongly political. I've always been a very liberty-based person, which doesn't really go well with today's modern Democrats, but it used to. I just kind of went along with what, it seemed like each president that happened in my life didn't really change much. I didn't really follow it closely until COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I started a business actually right when it happened. And I was lucky enough that it was a construction business and we were deemed essential. So we were able to work, and the business actually grew quickly and very profitable and everything that I wouldn't have expected at that time. But I really had my head down in that. But I was in Washington State at the time, near Seattle, and Jay Inslee was the governor at the time. The way that Washington handled COVID was about as bad as any state, other than California, was about as bad as any state could handle it. And a lot of the double standards of you can eat outside, but you have to be in a tent, which is the same thing as being in a building. And we don't have to get, but I just noticed all of the lies, and I noticed all of the obvious motivations, monetarily for the government. I noticed a lot of the control that was being imposed, and I started paying attention a lot more. And really, it kind of woke me up to start asking, what else have I been lied to about? What other things have I grown up to just kind of take at face value that aren't, or that have a deeper meaning, or have a different approach, or maybe a different angle that I didn't ever look at. And that to me was kind of, it's funny you bring up the red pill thing. I literally just watched the entire Matrix quadrilogy, whatever that is, all four of those. Yeah. And it really, it's definitely a theme. Like for me, it means kind of no going back on the taking everything as you're told. I mean, it doesn't mean you take the red pill once and then it's this other path. I mean, it's a constant struggle to stay on that path and to really dig into the truth behind what's going on. And really for me, that really just, I guess, activated during COVID, and I've kind of been stuck on it ever since.
This is so interesting because it's a pattern that I've noticed probably right around COVID, because I guess prior to that, I'm trying to think of any of the crises, the millions of crises, but COVID certainly stands out because it was worldwide. Of course, everybody experienced it. And from the perspective of libertarians and people who do sort of start to question things, that theme seems to be more common now, namely what you sort of experienced. Something happens that gets you skeptical that you're not hearing the whole story. Now, I want to contrast this because I go way, way back to the 70s and 80s of the early libertarian movement. And at that time, what would have distinguished someone clearly from the masses in terms of being red-pilled, we didn't use the term then, would have been the state is illegitimate. It is morally illegitimate, should not exist, full stop, and that was it. That was the moment or the mental flip. That's not to say today that's not happening in people's minds, but that would have been how you would have described it and how anyone would have described it. Today, as I ask the same question, I do notice more of a theme where simple skepticism is sort of the beginning of that process for people. Just this questioning. That comes from many different directions, but it's always landing on skepticism. Now, from there, it launches off into questioning the specific institutions. So for you, let me ask then, if that began your questioning, was there a later point where you, or did you, if I should ask that way, reach a point where you would say, oh, okay, the state itself as an institution is illegitimate and ought not exist? Was that a moment you reached at any point?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can see the t-shirt. I absolutely reached that point. And to keep with the Matrix theme, I followed that white rabbit and just kept hammering on. I've always been that way anyways. I've always been a just poke and poke and poke and poke until I get through to something. And that really, it kind of unraveled. It's like pulling a thread. You realize like pushing basically a bioweapon on people, taking away the rights that we all are born with. It really makes you start to wonder, like you said, like, well, what part of this is justified? What part of this establishment, what part of this thing that we've all bought into, or at least I bought into, what part of this is necessary and what part of it's not? And I've made some amazing friends in this kind of journey, I guess, if you will. That word gets overused, but on my path of kind of discovery or really looking into this, I've made some amazing friends. And I'm in the camp now, and I don't like to, just like atheism is just as much of a religion as religion is. I try not to say I'm this, but the way that I feel now is I feel that there's nothing that government provides that private co-ops or private relationships or private industry couldn't provide better. And I just don't see any use for organized government in the sense of at least of what we know of it. I mean, I've heard the term minarchist. I think I'm even a little bit farther than that. And again, growing up as a punk rocker, like the term anarchy, especially the Sex Pistols and a lot of anarchy was always kind of equated to like violence and lawlessness. And I've really come to understand the true definition of anarchy. And in simple terms, it's just leave me alone. I leave you alone. If we need to do something, we do it together and we do it fairly, and we don't need the state being involved whatsoever. So I'm fully arrived at that now. I'm also realistic, and I don't think we're going to get rid of the state. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm very much a realist, I think, and the libertarianism or anarchist points that can kind of reach the broader masses, like the non-aggression principle, and the don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. You can start at that point, and from there we can talk about what we agree with and don't disagree with. But I don't think the state's going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, with Venezuela and Greenland and all this other talk, it seems to just be getting bigger. But I'm very big on sound money. I really started paying attention again during COVID when they just started flooding the economy with just dollars that mean nothing. I'm really aware of what has happened since the Federal Reserve came on into existence, but then getting off the gold standard with Nixon, and just kind of where we've gone. I'm by no means an expert in any of these areas, but it's like I'm a bit of a jack of all trades on some of these things, for lack of a better metaphor. It's like I understand a little bit of all of these things. I'm not an expert on any of it, and I haven't really decided forever or decisively that everything I think is correct. One of the things I pride myself on, and I always have, and that's kind of how I've arrived at this, is I'm pretty confident in my opinions. My values don't really change. My values are pretty sound, but I'm very confident in my opinions, but I'm always open to new information and learning new things and changing my mind. I'm not afraid to change my mind. I'm not afraid to say, you know what, I was wrong. I learned this thing and now I feel like this about it. And I think that's been a big key to not, at least for me, to not getting put into a box of, oh, you're this or you're that. It lets me kind of float among all that. I'm in the neighborhood of all of that, but it doesn't nail me down to have to ascribe to each, any specific title.
Yeah, and that's the problem with labels, is that you can know exactly what you mean by that label, but Another person is going to have a different definition, possibly, especially for these triggering type labels like anarchist or whatever. So it's like, yeah, I want to describe myself if I have to in a nutshell. If someone's just asking me, where do we fall, and we have 5 seconds to do it, it's like, okay, what is it? But no, it's without a conversation, it's really hard to place yourself into some descriptive category with someone else, because you don't know what assumptions they're going to bring to the table, and then run with that and assume things that probably aren't true.
Now, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I really try and follow something called the 4 agreements, and one of those is don't make assumptions. And I've really tried hard not to. And growing up the way that I did, and growing up in a family business and a restaurant, I was public facing a lot as a young kid, all through my, I guess, formative years. I've always really valued conversation with people. And like you said, I mean, a label is one thing, but as soon as someone has a label in their head, they think they have you figured out. They think that, oh, you're just this thing. I put this in this box. And people are so much more than that. Even people that claim to be hardcore, whatever label they want to use, there's so much more to them than that. And I really value conversations, and I genuinely value disagreements, as long as they're good faith disagreements and good faith conversations, because it makes you flex a muscle in your critical thinking of, is what I believe or is what I feel really what I feel, or am I open to this other point of view? And a lot of times I'm not, depending on who I'm talking to. I mean, a lot of it is I'm pretty confident in how I feel, but I genuinely love to have that conversation and get challenged on how I feel about something. I don't mind people trying to pick it apart. And if I can't defend it, then I really need to start re-examining it and understand. And do I either know the topic well enough to say that that's how I feel, or do I need to learn more? And maybe I don't fall into what category, or maybe I don't believe what I thought I did after some new information. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And that's what being open-minded is. You have to say, yeah, I've thought about things. I've come to certain conclusions, but you might always think of it as tentative until you hear something that's counter to that may rock that over a little bit, or it doesn't, because as time passes, you find that, okay, this is making more and more sense. That's, at least for me, that's how libertarianism, anarchism was for me. The more I looked at it, yes, it was radical. This is, of course, many decades ago. This isn't mainstream. It makes sense to me in terms of common sense and logic and reason and morality, and yet not everyone thinks this. Okay, maybe I'm missing something. So yes, being open-minded is important. Helps solidify what you believe if you've given it time and thought and, like you say, conversations, because that's where you also see how people think in terms of their own psychology. So what I mean by that is, I found that the more I talk to folks about this general topic of freedom, I find that in what they're saying, there's really a goodness. They're motivated from a good place. So even if there ought to be a law to help so-and-so, well, they have a good instinct that they want people to be better off, right? They see suffering and they want the suffering to go away. That's a good instinct to start from. Socialism, collectivism is not the way to get there, it turns out. But just because they don't know that doesn't mean that they're against what they're saying. They simply don't know enough about it to realize the way to get there as a practical matter may not be the state. So for me, it helps to look under the hood of what a person's saying and try to find out if it comes from a good place.
And I think that, people, again, growing up in this system, I think there's almost a tacit agreement that people, enter into when it comes to paying taxes, which we, obviously, I'm not for any of that either. But there's a tacit agreement, I think, when people pay a tax to the government, to the big brother, whatever you want to call it, that now they're owed something. And we've obviously seen with USAID and with the stuff in Minnesota now, it's like, we're just cash machines. They don't owe us anything. They never did. They're not even pretending to. But what I'm getting at is, I think that, to your point, when someone has a positive motivation for wanting to make a law, and they're maybe misguided or they're maybe ill-informed on what the actual repercussions of that law will be, a lot of times, I think more times than not, the motivation is a positive motivation. And I think that there's a default assumption that the government's supposed to provide that. And I think that people are starting to realize that and it's not a mainstream thing, but they're starting to realize that the government isn't necessary for that. And if you want to do something, you just do it, and you find like-minded people that want to do it, and you just do it to whatever extent you can without getting thrown in a cage at gunpoint, of course. But I think that people are starting to kind of realize that. And I think for the longest time, it's just been an assumption that the government's supposed to handle things, and they've obviously been proven to be incompetent at really handling anything. So yeah, but I do agree with you. I definitely do.
And a lot of that too is the experience that you go through in your childhood, your teens, your early 20s. So, for example, the generation that grew up in the Depression in the 20s and 30s, they grew up with a distinct indoctrination that the government saved them from a terrible economic collapse caused by greedy business people or whatever the story was that they were fed. Well, they live their life now thinking that the government is there to save us and to help us. Well, the modern generations, those in their 20s, teens, 30s today, they don't have quite that same kind of, let's call it catastrophe in their upbringing that quite matches that, or anything like that, a World War II type of thing, where they can clearly say or clearly think that the government saves us from these terrible things. Sure, they grow up with, let's say, welfare and other things that teach them, propagandize them to think that the government helps, but it isn't as strong. Moreover, they're growing up in a time when they themselves have to figure out what to do. So, a kid has to figure out, what am I going to do regarding education? It's not a slam dunk that everyone is going to go into college or whatever it is. So there's a little bit more of a requirement that you have to kind of make it on your own a little bit, figure things out. That's a Gen X thing, that's a Gen Y thing, and so on. So the government is sort of really crowded out of that a little bit. Yes, exactly. So I think that gives us hope because of that.
I do agree that it gives you hope, but I think, again, I hate to ditto you, but it's like that whole, you are a product of your environment is a real thing. Like you said, I mean, one generation's perspective of the government's role can drastically change. We had all this rampant American pride after World War II. We thought we saved the world, and obviously I wasn't around at the time, but I've always enjoyed kind of educating myself about that war specifically because it's just so fascinating. But I think the younger, I'm 46, so I'm Gen X to the bone as far as the skeptical of everything. I very much remember what life was like before the internet, but I also was really a product of the internet of the first iteration of it, and when it truly kind of was a free web before it's been so kind of policed and homogenized and algorithm beaten to death now. But I think the younger generation, there's no way that they could think that the government's here to help them when anybody old enough to remember 9/11, to see how we're completely duped into the war with the wrong people for the wrong reasons, the 20 years of death all the way around, our soldiers, their citizens, their soldiers, the compounded problem of the debt that we went into because of that all these young people now are seeing the horrible realizations of the inflation of our monetary system, and then COVID. And so anybody who's 30 years old who really is old enough to remember that and has come up with that is going to have a completely diametrically opposed view of what the government's role is, and really be pretty bitter about it, I think. And not to get too tall on my soapbox here, but the virtue signaling and the racial exchange, almost like a currency that these young people have gone through, especially white men, younger white men have just been completely isolated from society in a lot of ways. And to watch how that unfolds, and to see again, like what outcome do you expect? What perspective do you expect these people to have when this is the system they grew up in? And that's why you see someone like a Nick Fuentes, or you see someone like a Andrew Tate, get so much of a following. And look, there's some things that Andrew Tate, not so much. He's a little over the top, but some things Nick Fuentes says I'm out of his generation, but some of those things I'm like, I completely see how you got there, and I'm with you. And some of it is obviously provocative for the sake of being provocative, and he's enjoying his moment in the sun. And then some of it's just too far. A lot of his views on women, it's kind of laughable to me. But I guess my point is, I do see how he got there, and I see how so many people follow somebody like that and really kind of hang on his every word.
And it's always important to remember that those types of personalities or those kind of movements, whether they're woke movements or whatever they are, they always end up being temporary. They always end up just being sort of this sine wave of events that go and come. So as catastrophic as they might sometimes seem at first, they don't generally play out that way, which means as people who try to do some thinking about this, we can be patient. We can sort of take the blow a little bit. Okay, that's a downturn a little bit, but it's probably going to turn around again. Just this whole last couple of years regarding Trump was such a roller coaster, right? So there was a time when it looked like he was going to end up in jail. And then suddenly the whole country seemed to go for him. And then he started off with a bang from their perspective. You know, we're doing everything we said we would do. 2 months pass, and now things start to go down for him. And in terms of, you know, the type of policies he's putting in, you know, very authoritarian, taking over countries, Greenland, Venezuela, whatever it might be. So we see this sine wave, and at every point along the way, you could just look at it as a snapshot and worry as a libertarian and say, oh my God, this is the end of the world. It's like, no, it's just another up and down of all these things. I think sometimes it takes a little perspective to not let ourselves get too excited about it.
It does. It takes some perspective, and it takes some years. It takes some wisdom. It takes kind of living through some of these things and seeing those. Because the first time you see the wave, you think, oh, this is the tsunami that's going to end us all. But as soon as you realize it's just another wave, and you've lived through some of those waves, then you can kind of see them coming. You can kind of estimate their impact, so to speak, to keep the metaphor going. So yeah, I do agree with you though, and I think that it's important. I think there's a universal truth also. Like I'm very, you know, the facts don't care about your feelings thing. And I'm not a fan of bumper stickers. I'm not a fan of quotes. There are some that are impactful that I acknowledge for sure. But for people that just throw out a quote and say, well, this is, have your own thoughts, have your own opinions. But I think that what's true is true. And there's no your truth and my truth. There's no, I'm speaking my truth. What's true is true. And if you can't prove that it's not true, you need to keep digging deeper until you get to whatever the nugget is or whatever the center is of whatever the thing is that's being discussed. But there's not two different versions of true. And I think we've gotten so far off track socially because everyone has been empowered to have their own truth and their own set of facts. And it has done nobody any favors.
There's a double-edged sword to that for sure. And that is, you pointed out the sort of the negative edge of that is that it's easy for people to think that whatever it is they think or believe is an absolute truth, even though others can have a completely different perspective. But what I like about it, not that I like that particular aspect of it, but is the fact that thanks to the internet, they are exposed to many, many different perspectives. And that was not true for our parents' generation and even our generation. We were spoon-fed the nightly news. We were spoon-fed what the New York Times wanted us to think, and whatever was on the radio, top of the hour. That was what we were led to believe happened in the world, and everyone else got exactly the same feed. So today, the young people, the people in the 30s, 40s, they're growing up in a world where that is absolutely not how it works. They hear everything. Yes, they might zero in on some of those things. Some of those things could be negative. That could be a bad thing. That pales in comparison to how it was when the world essentially used to be utterly indoctrinated. We don't have that today.
No, I completely agree. As you were saying that, I was just thinking about, it's not my original idea, but I completely subscribe to it. I think that when Elon bought Twitter was a fork in the road in the zeitgeist. And I think that I don't know that it can be understated how much of an impact that has socially to be able to have that exchange of ideas, because that was the time when if you weren't telling the right story, if you were posting things or talking about things that that weren't part of the the bought and sold narrative, you were shut down. And it wasn't that long ago, but people have kind of already forgotten how really stifling that is. And to your point, now that we have that access, and it's loosening up. YouTube's loosened up. You have things like Rumble. There are other places, but X or Twitter now being kind of the premier spot for being able to say just about whatever you want. There's certain things that I still wish, I wish it was complete free speech. It's close, but it's light years better than 5 years ago. And the ability to have those discussions and share those things that are true and expose people to information and flesh out your thoughts and find out whether you're right or wrong. That's just an invaluable resource that we have as a society.
It is. And it is, in a nutshell, it's essentially death to the state, because there's only one thing that really fundamentally keeps the state going, and that's its propaganda to sustain that belief in political authority. What I just said was a couple of sentences there, but boy, that's the essence of it. If the state has anything that it rests on, it is the hot air balloon of propaganda. It has to have that. It's not a question of, oh, it would be nice to have that. Oh no, it needs it. It is like a hot air balloon. That the burner that's under the hot air balloon that's making air hot, so it keeps it up. That burner must continually be on, and it must be on high. Like, you can't just lower it when you're halfway, 200 feet up and say, oh, I think a lower amount of hot air would be enough. Oh, no, we know what'll happen if you do that. That's propaganda. That's a literal metaphor, practically. Propaganda must be at a very high sustained level in order to keep that belief in authority sustained in the minds of the vast majority of people. Well, sorry, the internet has ensured that propaganda has been dialed down. That hot air has been dialed down, and perhaps COVID, right in that time frame, was when that really happened. I would say your insight about your statement about X being freed up like that was another one of those things that notched down that degree of hot air or propaganda. And so now the state has nothing it can do about that. It has to struggle. There is no answer short of shutting down the internet, which, at least in the United States, I don't see happening. So the state has something to worry about, I think.
They do. And the other side to that coin is the state is almost bigger than, it is bigger than the government, because there's so many supporters and companies that are intertwined and have been in bed with the state since their inception, that they're almost like arms, or parts of that propaganda machine. They're propaganda arms. Like, you see them buying up TikTok, buying up a lot of these other websites and social media to try and consolidate and to try and control that narrative still, because they realize that it's getting to where people can find the real information. Look at to go back to this Venezuela stuff. How many videos did you see that were posted of, look at all the people in Venezuela cheering on, what America did and what Trump did. And then you realize, like, oh, those are videos from the World Cup, or these are videos from people in Miami that aren't in Venezuela, or all these things where it's just the cat's out of the bag, and they can't control that narrative to the point now where that stuff gets out. The same day that happened, that stuff was getting out, and all the some of the podcasts I listened to were already the first day chipping away at the whole capture of Maduro and what possibly could be going on behind the scenes, because it looked like he was expecting to be picked up, so to speak. And that kind of conversation, a decade ago or a generation ago, it's just incomprehensible. But we have those kind of conversations all the time now. And that's it's a very powerful thing, but it also can be used for bad. It can be used as a weapon as well. And we've seen that too.
We've seen it, and they will continue to try that. I've never operated under any illusions that the state and its handmaidens will continue to try. But because of the decentralization of information flow, it is a losing game. It's just a game that's going to take a little while to play out more. But I think of it a little bit like a sound wave, the sine wave up and down. And I feel in the past it's been stretched out. I forgot if that's amplitude or what it is, but I think of it as a longer wave like that, where the peaks are some sort of catastrophic event, or a 9/11, or a Pearl Harbor, whatever it is, and that's a moment when people can wake up, where they could say, oh, what really happened here? But the next big thing is so far ahead on that wave, you don't get to another one for a while, that they forget the first one. They don't make a pattern out of that because it was so long. Yeah. But the internet's changed that. It's compressed the cycles. So now crises, quote unquote crises, are happening constantly. So it's Greenland, it's Venezuela, it's Gaza, it's Ukraine again, it's climate change again. It's quick. And I think the human mind now can make sense of that better because they're happening quick. Every time the government says that something's happening, that's the end of the world, it's not the end of the world. Next one comes. They're saying it again. So within one short generation, you have 100 of these, whereas before, in one generation, you had 2 of them. So you couldn't form the pattern. I don't know if I explained that well, but it just occurred to me that might be a metaphor for how easier it is maybe now for the younger generations to start to increase their skepticism.
Oh, I completely agree. I've got a good friend, Brent Freeman, who actually would be an amazing guest for your show.
I watched your interview with him.
He's astounding at pattern recognition, and he points out a lot of things that, so far the ones I've followed, he hasn't been wrong yet. He's very good at pattern recognition, and I think, to your point, a lot of other people can be at least more in tune with that now that so many things keep happening.
You mentioned Brent Freeman, and I was going to ask you, among the various guests you've had or even shows you've watched, can you talk about some of either the topics or the people themselves who particularly got you interested or that particularly resonated with you?
Absolutely. We did one recently where my co-host Mark was with his mother. His mother had some medical issues, and I did the show by myself. And we had Rob Yates on, who's running for the LNC chair position, and we had Brent on, and we went deep. I mean, the conversation was about consciousness and whether it's emergent or fundamental. And I love, like I said earlier, I love those conversations because I think I know how I feel about something, but then there's always somebody smarter in the room. There's always somebody else who's going to teach me something or give me a perspective I hadn't thought about. And that was one that really stands out to me. I recently joined Mark's show. So I used to do a podcast back in 2011, 2012. And before podcasts were video podcasts, back when it was like literally on an iPod, where the name came from. When I was in Southern California, down in LA, I was friends with a lot of people who worked at K-Rock in Los Angeles, the rock station there. They broke bands like Sublime. I mean, the K-Rock's huge in the LA area. And we had access to a lot of the personnel that worked at that station. Kevin and Bean were the huge morning show guys, then the old school style, like the morning zoo style. And so that's kind of what our first show was. My first show was called the Nothing But Show, and it was supposed to be, nothing but whatever we want to talk about. And it was very much set up like a morning zoo type of show. We had segments and all these kind of things. We didn't really know any better. And we, back in the day, had a lot of it was comedians, some porn stars at the time, some personalities and things, but we had, I had Adam Carolla on long time ago. Ari Shaffir is one of the comedians, Joey Diaz, Hank Williams III, really an eclectic kind of mix of everything. Then I moved to Seattle, the show stopped, and I became a listener of podcasts, and podcasts evolved to what they are now, where like this, sites like Riverside and StreamYard, and anybody with a phone can do a podcast, and the quality is amazing. I mean, the barrier to entry has gotten so much lower. When we used to do our show, we rented a place on Wilshire in the Miracle Mile there, where it was like an office, like a WeWork kind of office share space, and we would take our gear in there and set up every single week. Big glass office, so the guests had somewhere to go. They would come in the studio. We would film it for ourselves, but it was released really as a audio only podcast. So Smash cut, fast forward to me moving to Seattle, that show kind of ended. Podcasting became what it is now, and the Joe Rogans and it just became such a big thing. And now I find myself, I still love the comedians. I listen to Rogan probably half of his episodes, and I'll listen to, he always has some amazing thinkers on there, and his track record during COVID, to go back to that, was amazing. And the people he had on that were really saying a lot of true things that were being suppressed was, they were knocking it out of the park. But I mean, I listen to Modern Wisdom now with Chris Williamson. I love that show. I used to like Tim Ferriss's show. Pardon me. When Tim Ferriss would have, titans of industry and all these just thinkers on. But then, I like Sean Ryan. The biggest thing, though, what I was getting at is, I don't know if you're aware of Clint Russell and the Liberty Lockdown show. I've been a fan of his for a while, and I ended up going on Free's game show, the Are You Smarter Than a Politician? Had a great time. Some of my friends were there. It was friends I made doing that show. I've done it a couple times now. And I reached out to Free after the show, and I said, hey, I used to podcast. I haven't done it for a long time. I forgot how cathartic it was for me to have these kind of conversations and how stimulating it was to do these kind of things. And I said, do you know anybody, or do you have anybody that, is looking for a co-host or looking to do a show? I don't really want to do anything by myself. I'm not good enough at monologue kind of shows. And he said, yeah, this guy, Mark Pulls, his co-host just quit. I think he had a baby. I'll connect you guys. So he connected me with Mark, and Mark already had Clint Russell scheduled, and I wasn't part of the show yet, and I missed having Clint or being able to talk with Clint on the show. But Mark really, has been nothing but amazing with his, he's been so gracious with the show because, he's been doing it for a few years now. And when Jason left, I know the story, he was going to quit, and he just told me, he goes, hey, if Free vouches for you, I'm paraphrasing, but Free vouches for you, and if you're really looking to do this, you're going to be the co-host. We're not going to do a trial. We're not going to try it out. You're the co-host. And he gave me the keys to the car, so to speak. And we've been off and running now and really doing regular episodes. And I say all that to say that I'm very tenacious when it comes to getting guests. I will really go hard at people to try and get them to come on. I did that in my show 15 years ago. But we have some amazing guests coming up. We have Natalie and Clayton Morris coming up from Redacted News, which is a great show on Rumble that is really tells a lot of truth that you're not going to get on mainstream news. We've got a guy, Charles Cornish Dale, who just wrote a book called The Last Men that is amazing. Talks all about the decline in testosterone and the increase in microplastics and all these. So we're getting some really awesome, amazing people to talk with. We've got a show tomorrow with a guy named Toad, who is kind of Mark knows him a little better than I do. He seems very provocative in all the right ways. He kind of pokes the bear also. But really the point of this is I love talking to people about just about anything. Religion is one of the topics I do like to discuss. Most people stay away from that one. But I've never really shied away from it, but my spectrum of what I take in is very broad. And that's obviously all kind of peppered in with me. I still listen to a lot of music. So I constantly have something on. If I'm in a room, I have something on: music, podcast, something at all times.
It's so obvious watching you and watching Mark that what you're doing is finding what it is that pleases you as a host, as a co-host, picking guests that interest you, reaching out to them, as you said, getting them on, talking about whatever it is that makes sense. In other words, you're doing this in a sense for the enjoyment of it, right? You're not necessarily trying to run some kind of script. You're not trying to focus on any particular category, but you're enjoying these topics. You like talking about whatever it is that you guys like to talk about. You're picking guests that fit that. And the enjoyment of that comes right out. That's an obvious thing in watching your guys' podcast. And I think that is infectious. That is what draws, at least for me, that's what draws me to want to watch it. It doesn't even have to be a topic I'm interested in, but when you guys talk, you're having fun. You're enjoying each other. You're enjoying the topic. So I really compliment you guys as a couple of guys who really seem to be naturals for this.
I know. I greatly appreciate it. It's very flattering. I'm glad that comes across because you nailed it. I mean, I don't do this to promote someone else's this or that unless it's something that I'm into learning or if, if when I have people on, they may be known for one thing and sure, we'll cover that, but I want to know how they got there and what makes them tick and what their, what their childhood was like and what kind of things they went to that, back to the, your life is your experience is like, I like to know what people's experiences are and what forms their opinion and forms their perspective on the world. And, to really distill everything down to we're all people and we all have these, and I don't mean to be corny, but everyone's got fears. Everyone's got, things they're confident about, but I really like to really dive into what makes people tick. And if it's not interesting to me, or if it's not, if it's someone that has just an agenda to push, I'm just not interested in doing it. So I'm glad that comes across. And like I said, I mean, Mark has been nothing but gracious, and we really have hit a rhythm just a couple months in now doing regular shows. And it's like going to the gym too. Like, you do this show regularly. It's like, if you don't do a couple shows, you start to feel like you're going to atrophy a little bit. And this muscle of having these conversations and the critical thinking is really, spurred by doing it regularly also.
Right. And for me, especially not looking at it as a job, but as something I just like doing. That's the motivator to keep doing it. But it's so important, I think, up front, which you guys have done, I think, is sort of just allow your personalities to weave into the work itself so that it isn't work and it's just you and it's your natural selves with your natural talents, of course, and then taking it from there and allowing it to find its course. That's a little bit how my whole thing started. When I thought about doing a podcast, I said, well, what resonates with me? And for me, this is a personal perspective on it. It's that I see fellow libertarians, fellow freedom thinkers, black-pilled all the time because they see the state for what it is more clearly than anyone in the world. And it's horrifying. It's death, it's destruction, it's suffering, it's misery, it's poor education, it's all these awful things. We see it clearer than everyone. So we end up living our philosophical lives observing the worst in the world and knowing why it is and why it doesn't have to be that way. That's super black pilling. The observation I made for watching this for decades was that, nobody's noticing that there could be white pills in here, that there could be reasons for hope, not just attaboy type things, but actual realistic, tangible, provable reasons for hope. And I thought, well, that's something I could get behind. That's something I'd like to dispense to fellow travelers. And that was, for me, the inspiration for doing the White Pill Box. It's literally to try to find ways to give my fellow travelers reasons for hope so they could keep going and doing what they enjoy, but with a kind of a better attitude.
Well, you're excellent at doing that. If we're going to be trading compliments, you're excellent at doing that. I'm very, like you said, I don't see all the white pills and things. I try and be optimistic. I really am. I'm not really a glass is half full or glass is half empty. I'm more of a, hey, there's water in that glass kind of guy. But I've watched some of your episodes, especially one with Jason. And really you do find reasons for hope or positive things in areas where people would think it's just nothing but doom and destruction. And you definitely have a talent for that. And I think that you were correct in wanting to pursue that and that being a thing to inspire you because, collectively we need more of that. And I really think that you've hit a nerve in a good way of observing and noticing those things and sharing them with everybody. So hats off to you for that.
Oh, thank you. Now, on sort of the flip side of that, and I was watching, and I got this from watching a previous episode, and are there things that bug you that in the movement or in conversation that it's like, I can't get on board with that. And the particular example that you guys had brought up was this recent debate between Dave Smith and Liquid Zulu, where they were talking about the non-aggression principle, and one of the common extreme case scenarios of that is, would you steal a penny and save or whatever if the whole world was going to be destroyed? And you guys sort of were on the same page as I would be on that. It's like, oh, I cringe when I hear that. Not only that, but does that or other let's say, libertarian conversations graded
You
your...
know, the thing to me, the thing that bothers me the most in the quote unquote movement or in the area is the litmus tests. You know, when people say, oh, you're not libertarian if this, or if that, you're not. And it's like, everybody is, you know, to give a little bit of grace, everybody's doing their best. Everybody's trying to figure this out. Who you are today for anybody, if you're a critical thinker, is not who you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So when someone is putting a line out, that's a big red flag for me. When somebody says you're not a libertarian unless you think this or this, like, I try and stay engaged, but that's a thing that kind of turns me off pretty quickly too, because I don't feel like someone's going to have a good faith conversation at that point.
Yeah, that's the trigger, I think, is that they're not really there to have a conversation. They're there to make some kind of point, look good. There's a motivation there other than dialogue and discourse to try to sort of find the truth. That's why that particular debate really disappointed me a lot. I was hoping that there would be a little more almost scholarly thinking around it, calm discussions about that. The non-aggression principle, that's great. Let's talk about that. No. But then you guys, in talking about it, kind of did that in a way. You were trying to just, you know, find the rational thinking behind it. That made more sense to me, actually.
I'm working on trying to get Dave on. He's one of the ones I'm going to go after and try and get him to come on. He's kind of been adjacent to, he's a good friend with Jacob Winograd, and Jacob's coming on our show in a few weeks to debate Jack Danger on some things that came up during Free's game show, talking about, and these are like heavy topic, Islam being a religion versus an ideology, a lot of these things. And I volunteered, like, let's host this debate. Let's talk about this, because again, I'm all about the discussion. I want to learn from people that are smarter than me. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the conversation we had with Rob and Brent was deep in a lot of ways, but very, I don't want to say easy. I'm trying to, not elementary, but it seemed like a lot of it seems like common sense. That's one thing that I surprise myself, because I will assume that people have more common sense than they do, and things that I think should be ubiquitously accepted end up being something that a lot of people have struggles with, like what we went into in that conversation. And I just find that being able to really dive into those things without judgment, and have a couple times in that conversation, I was like, oh, okay, well, I thought this, and I was incorrect, and I see what you're saying. And Rob and Brent are just such amazing, deep kind of philosophical thing, especially Brent with the philosophy. It's always good to have people like that are kind of carrying the conversation along too.
Yeah. Having philosophical types is a big help, because they've thought through things at levels that I certainly myself either haven't done or can't do. I think it's more of the latter. I mean, you need a deep brain to think through some of these things, but I love hearing them, because at least it stretches my thinking, and it could poke into some area of my brain that maybe I didn't realize I can think about things. So I love hearing it, even if sometimes it can go over my head. You mentioned Dave Smith. I really hope you can get him. I know you would host a great debate, whoever is involved with it. Dave is one of the ones I've done a couple of episodes on, and the one I've liked the most, which I've tried to push on the website, on the podcast, is it was entitled "Is Dave Smith Onto Something?" Because Dave is the only one that, at least that I don't know if did you see that particular episode?
I saw, yeah, I did.
Yeah, so for the listeners, that's one where I've made the observation that Dave seems to be the only big voice in the movement that seems to understand, or getting the first glimmer, that something's changing in the dialogue. And it kind of relates back to what we were talking about before, and how the propaganda is not as powerful anymore, and it's definitely weak. And he makes the statement, can the state, paraphrasing, can the state run without the same level of propaganda? And the flat out answer is no, it can't. I mean, this is almost a scientifically mathematical thing. It can't. It's not a question of might. And I'm waiting for that moment when Dave makes enough connections to where he sees what I believe I've uncovered, or I should say stumbled on, and that is the psychology that we've actually started the transition to a free society. I'm waiting to hear that from a speaker like Dave, who's more articulate than me, who who has a broader audience than me, because that is the conclusion that you almost inevitably have to come to. And so I'm excited to see him doing podcasts with not just the Tucker Carlsons and so on, but with, folks like yourself, where I think some of that could get fleshed out because it's a little more libertarian and not as current events.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think for me, there's two things about Dave that really stand out. And I've been following him and paying attention to him for a while. But the first of the things is that I've watched him kind of exponentially grow in his, quote unquote power, and watched his views kind of solidify, and watched a lot of his points, and he becomes more and more articulate and more knowledgeable about things. The conversation with Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan was like just one for the ages, as far as you have someone who is written off as a comedian who's kind of brushed aside, who just has all the information, all the logical points, and it was really fascinating to watch that. And the other thing about Dave for me is, I guess there's three things. The other thing for Dave is he has principles. And just like we talked about earlier, the state is illegitimate. The state shouldn't exist. But we live in a time where it does exist. So how do we juxtapose those things where we can continue our lives and work towards the things that are our principles, but also be realistic about the world that we're in and try and make incremental changes from the inside without saying, we have to have anarchy or nothing. And one of the things about Dave is that he's very good at laying out the principles, but also having a foot in reality. And I've always really enjoyed that about him. And the last thing with Dave is I love comedy. I love stand-up comedy. I always say that if I didn't have a family and wife and kids, I would have gotten into comedy and done it. And I don't mean that as I would have been great. I probably would have failed at it, but I could never, when I do something, I go 100,000% into it. And what I would have to give to trying to make it as a comedian would completely obliterate my obligations as a husband and a father. And I can't do that. For some of those guys that started out doing comedy and they've had families that after the fact, my complete respect to them. But the thing about Dave is, I don't know if you've seen his comedy, but he's actually a really good comedian also. And he's surrounded by really funny people, and he doesn't take himself too seriously because of it. He knows he's a court jester, and he's going to throw stuff at the king, but he also knows that, he's at the end of the day, he's going to laugh about it, and he's going to find a way to have a funny, angle on it. And, his 30-minute special on YouTube is really good from a few years ago during COVID. And then I went and saw him a few months ago in Tacoma and watched him live right up front. And it was awesome. Every time he comes around, I'm going to try and go see him. And I love how he separates the comedy from his political, passions, because he doesn't really get into politics on stage. I mean, he says a couple things, but nothing that a normal comedian's not going to say in passing, like the mainstream political things. But he's not Dave the Libertarian when he's on stage, and I love that about him.
With someone like Dave, it's a good example. When I would listen to him, I would say 7 years ago, the general thrust of most of his content was quite principled, libertarian, anarchist content. He covered current events, but it was highly connected to the principles of libertarianism. He's morphed a little bit into really just covering more of the current events as they stand. But somewhere in there's always that introduction of either skepticism of the ruling elite or even mockery of the ruling elite, whoever it is. And Trump is a great example. So Dave may have endorsed him, let's say, leading up to the election, but now he's not. Okay, you could say, oh, look at that. He had to change. And then you laugh at him for that. No, he's honest enough to have reversed himself. That's how I look at it, right? He's saying he shouldn't. I don't know if he said he regretted voting for him, but it's close enough to that to where he's actually saying that. So by doing that, by being honest, and also by mocking them every chance he gets, that's accomplishing something. Adding to the skepticism is what really counts, because it is always hard to make an anarchist out of someone. It is really hard to do that. If the world's ever going to get there, it's not going to be. Yes, that would be. You said you don't like all memes. So that's probably a meme you could go for. But yeah, we're never going to make any kind of high percentage of anarchists It's just not going to happen, which means if anything is going to happen, it's only going to be because the vast majority of people get a tad more skeptical. And that will be enough, but we have to satisfy ourselves that that is what has to be enough.
No, I agree. I mean, I've said this many times, and I don't want anything catastrophic to happen. So I got to preface it with that. But short of some sort of cataclysmic event that resets, our society, I don't think that, like you said, we're not going to be making anarchists. It's not a thing that's going to catch on and be it's never going to be the mainstream unless something, cataclysmic occurs and takes place. And to your point about Dave kind of changing his mind or whatever, I've said this to my daughter. Is very fascinating. She's almost 10. Her mother and I are divorced ever since she was a year old. So she's been going back and forth this whole time. And her mother is very much the Seattle liberal feminist type, and I'm quite not that type. And so during this last election cycle, she was at her mom's house getting one kind of bit of information and overhearing things, and come to my house and ask questions. And what about this? What about this? And I've always been one to talk to my kids and tell them the truth at whatever level they can understand. I never do the because I said so or don't worry about that thing. I'm not that guy. And so we talked a lot about Trump and about the lawfare and things that they're trying to throw him in jail, and the stuff with the real estate and January 6th and a lot of these things. And I never gave her anything definitive, but I was trying to teach her how to, the first steps of a foundation of critical thinking. And one of the things I said to her, and I say this, and I would say this till the day I die, is when you're taking a president who is trying to appeal to the masses and has to appeal to the masses to get elected, there's never going to, if you're being honest with yourself, there's never going to be a person in the office that you're going to agree or disagree with everything that they do. It's just not going to be the case. So you have to be willing to give the attaboys when they're deserved, and then give the criticism equally when that's deserved. And that's one of the things, I think Dave does to bring home your point about his feelings about Trump, is he endorsed Trump pretty, full throated before the election. And I think it was because he was so obviously knew what would happen if Kamala won the election. So it wasn't like if you can pick anybody, do you want Trump? But he's been very quick to the Gaza stuff. When all that happened, he was calling, and the Iran bombing, like Dave was calling for impeachment. And to go from an endorsement to impeachment is, a lot of people looked at it as flip-flopping or kind of fair weather, but to what I'm getting at is like, that's important. That's imperative to continue your critical thinking, is to be able to say, hey, what you're doing here with the executive orders on keeping men out of women's sports was great. What you're doing here with closing the border down and trying to control people that are illegally using the entitlement programs that we have. Those are positive things. The other things, with obviously seeming like you're completely sold out to your donors and these regime change thing, like we have to be just as loud in our criticisms as we are in our affirmations of these actions. So there's never going to be a president that if you're honest with yourself, you're going to agree or disagree with everything that they do.
Well, right. And also what's great about teaching a child critical thinking at that early stage is that growing up, when they hear not just, oh, this president did A, B, and C, and so those are good, and we'll classify those as good, but he did X, Y, and Z, and those are bad, and we'll classify those as bad. See, that's critical thinking. I'm able to not judge him that A, B, C, D, E, F, G were all good or all bad. No, that's not the lesson of that critical thinking. What they come out knowing is, if someone comes along and says, that person has no legitimate right to rule any man at all, full stop, their mind might say, oh, that's an interesting thought. Tell me more about it. Rather than say, I'm not going to listen to you. That's too radical. That's the value of teaching a child critical thinking. Because sooner or later, in the world that we're in, that message is going to be heard. It may not be often, but it'll be heard. So what you want, what we would want, would be any child, any adult hearing that, is to say, I've never heard that before. And rather than have a visceral reaction, say, tell me more. See, that's the value of critical thinking in my mind.
No, I agree. And she's going to be biased toward, obviously she's a child, but she's going to be biased towards Trump just because she wrote him a letter and got a letter back. So she trumps aces in her book as far as that. She's like, President wrote me back. We're cool now. So no, to your point though, I mean, it's absolutely necessary. The critical thinking, the brutal honesty to whatever level she can handle. And then I'm a proud gun owner. I'm proficient with mine. And that's one of the things I started to teach her as well is, no one's going to protect you but you. And I have 3 daughters, and I want all 3 of them to feel comfortable carrying a handgun, comfortable shooting guns, and not be afraid of them, and understand that, it's just a tool for your protection. And, especially with having girls, I mean, I'd rather have them conceal carry than carry a rape whistle. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. Yeah. I'm 100% on board with that. Good for you. Was there any other topics you wanted to cover? Because we're at about the hour, and I wanted to make sure we carve out some time for any topics that you might want to talk about.
No, nothing jumps to mind. I got to say thanks for having me on. This was it's very stimulating. I love these conversations. I love kind of covering everything. I got my friend, the most recent band that I was in is called Notorious Saints. So if you can go look Spotify, all that kind of stuff. We're a 3-piece band. I do the vocals and I play drums. My buddies that are in this band with me, we used to all be in California. Now one's in LA, one's in Texas, and I'm up here in Oregon, in Seattle. But we're going in the studio here in March to do another recording session, and I'll share that with you when it's done. But I think these efforts, these things, these cathartic things, just find your passion and follow your passion. Like you said, don't do this because you want the recognition or because you want the accolades. Do this because it inspires you and because you enjoy doing it. And, that whole, if you love what you do, played out cliche. I mean, it's true. It absolutely is true. And follow your passions. That would be my final thought, and stick to whatever you're at and master your craft.
Boy, here. I'm with you 100%. Thanks. All right. Well, Jake, thank you again very, very much for appearing on the show and finishing our little trilogy here with me on your guys' show, Mark on this show, and now you on this show. Thank you so much. I had a great time.
I did too. Thanks for having me. We'll have you back on too. I love these conversations.
Me too. And of course, as usual, thanks to all of you out there for joining us today. Take care and see you next time.
Thanks so much to all subscribers and everyone who joined today. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.